Hello everyone. Today I am going to talk about the most asked question during my wildlife photography workshop. Either I should use the aperture priority or the manual settings with auto ISO, which I use most of the time. So while I am using manual settings with auto ISO, I use minimum ISO 100 and maximum ISO 1000 to 2000 depending on the light condition and the result I want. So let's talk about this. Which settings you should use while you are on field, aperture priority or manual settings with auto ISO. But there are some obstacles of using aperture priority. The first one is shutter speed unpredictability. In aperture priority, you cannot control your shutter speed. For me, that's the most important part while you are doing wildlife photography. Either you want to freeze the subject or you want to make a motion in your frame. You need to have the control of shutter speed while you are taking the photo. But in aperture priority, you cannot control the shutter speed. You can control the ISO, and based on the ISO you setting, depending on that and depending on the light or depending on the how much exposure bias you are setting up, depending on that your shutter speed will change, and that you have to check while you are taking photo. For me it's a bit difficult. In aperture priority you set your ISO, you set your aperture, and camera will decides the shutter speed. But in wildlife, shutter speed is the most important part to freeze the action or get the motion in your frame. If you want to make some creative photography in some situation during backlight or low light situation, or even if you want to get some low key or rim light, camera may decrease your shutter speed too much and you will get some motion in your frame. The second point is inconsistent light in wildlife. See, in nature we cannot control the light. We have to play with the light we are getting from the nature. So this wildlife, they move very fast, and in open grassland they are in good light, and as soon as it will be in a shade you will get low light and your shutter speed will change immediately and you may not notice. For flying birds or running animals, you need to lock fast shutter speed around 1 by 2000 or 1 by 3200 in aperture priority. Unless ISO is auto and you dial exposure compensation quickly, you cannot guarantee the camera picks the right shutter speed. And even if it picks the right shutter speed, you have to check twice either you get the right shutter speed or not. My fourth point is over rely on exposure compensation. You constantly need to change your exposure compensation to get the underexpose and overexpose, and it will slow you down. In wildlife, I believe in action, I believe in motion. I'm not saying that you should freeze the movement every time. Sometimes you can make the motion. But if you have the control of your shutter speed, it will be easier because you know how much shutter speed you give to your camera, and based on that you can get your predictable result. And why I use manual settings with auto ISO? I will give you another 4 reasons. The first one is you have the full control of light. You have the full control of your motion. You have the full control of your creative frames. Either you want to make it dark or if you want to make it bright or maybe low key or high key, you have the control in your hand. And you have the more flexibility on moving subjects. Now there is one obstacle, that is your ISO. Because you cannot control your ISO in manual settings with auto ISO. You have to decide the maximum ISO limit. By default it could be set as 12800, which you should change, or else in low light condition, if you are trying to shoot or if you are trying to freeze the subject, maybe you are using higher shutter speed, you will always get more noise because of the ISO. The limit 100 to 12,800. Now when the camera, they have the limitation to 100 to 12,800, camera will try to boost the ISO if you are trying to increase the shutter speed. So it's a very important part that you set your maximum ISO, you give it a limit depending on the light or depending on the lens. Now as a point, it's a very, this point is very subjective. Some people may go against it, but it's a fact. Aperture priority settings is good if you are using any prime lens like 400 2.8, 300 2.8, or maybe any 2.8 lens. When you are using that, you have more light, so you don't have to worry about the motion blur, because at the same time when you are using some lens which is 5.6, the minimum f-stop is 5.6 or 6.3, and at the same time when I am using f2.8, I have more scopes to get better light. Because if there is a situation where I am using the ISO 800 and you are also using the ISO 800, my aperture is f2.8 and you are using the aperture of 6.3, so you will get around 1 by 100 shutter speed, where I will get 1 by 500 shutter speed. And in 1 by 500 shutter speed I may not get that motion, where in 1 by 100 shutter speed you will get motion blur, which is unintentional.